In Hollywood, dying old like a normal person is the greatest luxury, because once they step into this world of fame, they are already marked by a curse. The Wizard of Oz, Superman, The Little Rascals, Rebel Without a Cause. They are memories for millions of Americans who grew up in front of the TV. But behind the studio lights, so many faces who once made audiences laugh, cry, and dream had endings that were too painful, too strange, or had too many gaps for Hollywood to ever bury forever. A little girl from America's most famous fairy tale movie dies because of a curse. A martial arts legend leaves in a way nobody saw coming. And a king closed his eyes but was never allowed to sleep in peace. This is not a video to spread more conspiracy theories. These are 15 Hollywood legends whose endings still make people feel regret, fear, and argue to this day. Take a deep breath before watching today's video, and maybe you will realize that being an ordinary person is its own kind of luck. Number 15. Judy Garland. Opening the list of the darkest deaths is the little girl who stepped out of America's fairy tale movie. That movie already had a reputation as a dream built out of pain. The original Tin Man almost died after breathing toxic aluminum powder in his makeup. Margaret Hamilton was burned during a fire effects scene. But the person who carried the longest wound was not the one who got burned and not the one who almost suffocated under makeup. It was Judy Garland. When she became Dorothy, Judy was still just a little girl. And yet MGM controlled her weight, her sleep, her work schedule, her appearance, and even her energy. Hollywood back then had a very cruel way of operating. If a young star was tired, they gave them pills to wake up. If they could not sleep, they gave them pills to sleep. Judy did not die on the set of The Wizard of Oz, but many people believe the tragedy at the end of her life began right there. On June 22, 1969, Judy Garland died in London at only 47. The official conclusion said she died from an accidental barbiturate overdose, not suicide. The haunting thing is that this death does not need some mysterious killer to become dark. It makes people ask what Hollywood did to a talented child so that the little girl who once sang over the rainbow was finally swallowed by exhaustion, dependence on medication, and loneliness. So what do you think? Did The Wizard of Oz give Judy Garland immortality? Or was it where Hollywood started taking away that little girl's real life? And if Judy hurts us because little Dorothy was drained too early, number 14 is even harder to believe. A legend who seemed unbeatable, someone nobody expected to appear on this list. Number 14, Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee did not die on a film set. He did not die in a fight. He collapsed in a room in Hong Kong at only 32, and people still argue about what really happened that day. Bruce Lee did not seem like someone who could suddenly disappear. To an entire generation of viewers, he was speed, discipline, power, and a kind of energy almost no one could touch. But on July 20th, 1973, everything stopped. The official conclusion said Bruce Lee died from brain swelling believed to be a reaction to the painkiller Equagesic. That sounds simple, but for the public, that explanation never truly settled anything. Someone that young, that strong, with almost superhuman control over his body, how could he be gone that fast? What makes the story even colder is that 2 months before his death, Bruce had suddenly collapsed while doing post-production on Enter the Dragon. Doctors found that his brain was swollen. That time he survived. The next time he did not get another chance. The cruel part is that the movie that lifted him to the top of the world arrived too late for him to see it. Enter the Dragon came out only a few days after Bruce died. It turned him into a global legend, but he was no longer alive to witness the world truly understand who it had just lost. People have offered all kinds of explanations, from a drug reaction to exhaustion from training and hot weather. Then, like every Hollywood tragedy that feels too hard to believe, darker rumors slipped in too. Not all of them have evidence. But the empty space around Bruce Lee's death is what has kept them alive. Maybe the case has been closed for a long time, but for anyone who grew up seeing Bruce Lee as someone who could not be defeated, the question is still there. How could a legend like that be gone so fast? If Bruce Lee was turned into a legend right after death, number 13 is even more tragic. A king watched by the entire world until his final breath, and even death did not let him rest. Number 13, Michael Jackson. This name may set the comments section on fire with debate, but I feel like I need to talk about him after watching Michael. Michael Jackson was never a normal name. To many people, he was the king of pop thriller, the moonwalk, the man who turned music videos into global events. To others, he was a figure too complicated, too controversial, too hard to look at in just one color. But no matter which side you stand on, Michael Jackson's death is still one of the darkest moments in modern entertainment. On June 25, 2009, Michael died in Los Angeles at only 50. At the time, he was preparing for This Is It, the comeback concert series in London. The whole world was waiting for him to return to the stage, but he never made it to that show. The official conclusion said Michael died from acute propofol intoxication along with other sedatives. The coroner's report classified the death as a homicide. His personal doctor, Conrad Murray, was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The chilling thing is that Michael did not die at some wild party, did not die while chasing more fame, and did not die under the stage lights. He died in a very human struggle. He just wanted to sleep. When you really think about it, that is almost too sad to accept. A man with the whole world watching every step, with millions of fans, a personal doctor, money, and power, still could not find a normal night's sleep. Michael Jackson was one of the most famous people who ever lived. But even after death, he was not left in peace. People still argue about his music, private life, legacy, pain, and questions that every generation answers in a different way. So what do you think? Was Michael Jackson a genius crushed by fame and the media, or an icon too complicated to ever be fully forgiven? Number 12, Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate did not die because of fame drugs or a body pushed past its limit. She died inside her own home while more than 8 months pregnant on a night Hollywood has never forgotten. Before the name Sharon Tate was forever tied to tragedy, she was a rising actress of the late 60s. She had Valley of the Dolls, a Golden Globe nomination, Beauty of Future, and she was preparing to become a mother. Then the night of August 8th into the early morning of August 9th, 1969, happened. Sharon was at the house on Cielo Drive in Los Angeles. Her husband, Roman Polanski, was in Europe making a film at the time. Members of the Manson family broke into the home. Sharon Tate and 4 others were murdered. I do not want to turn this part into a story about Charles Manson. Hollywood has already done that too much. The person who needs to be remembered here is Sharon Tate. What made this death shake people was not only the brutality. It happened in a beautiful house in the Los Angeles hills where stars once thought money, fame, fences, and distance could keep darkness outside. And then for decades, Sharon was remembered more through her death than her life. But before that horrifying night, she was a young woman living, loving, working, and waiting to welcome her child. Maybe that is why Hollywood still wants to rewrite that story. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is not just a history game. To me, it feels like a late wish if only Sharon Tate had gotten the next morning. Some deaths make a star disappear. Sharon Tate's death made all of Hollywood wake up and realize it had never been as safe as it thought. Number 11, Heath Ledger. In 2008, Hollywood did not just lose a 28-year-old actor. It lost a man right before the moment the whole world was about to call him a legend. That is what makes this death haunt people in its own way. Heath was not a star with only one role. He had 10 Things I Hate About You. A Knight's Tale, then Brokeback Mountain, the role that brought him an Oscar nomination when he was still very young. But on January 22, 2008, Heath Ledger was found dead in his rented apartment in Soho, New York. He was only 28, and The Dark Knight had not even been released yet. The official conclusion from the New York Medical Examiner's Office said he died from acute intoxication caused by a combination of several prescription medications, including painkillers, anti-anxiety medication, and sleep aids. The death was ruled an accident, not suicide. But Hollywood never lets a story like that rest as just a line in a coroner's report. When The Dark Knight came out a few months later, Heath's Joker was too intense, too unusual, too unforgettable. Audiences started looking at every smile, every stare, every line, and asking whether that role had pulled him into somewhere too dark. To be clear, there is no solid evidence that the Joker directly caused Heath Ledger's death. What is mentioned more often is that he had been dealing with insomnia, exhaustion, illness, and multiple prescription medications in the final period of his life. But the timing is what makes this story hurt. He did not live to see The Dark Knight become a global phenomenon. He did not live to see his Joker called one of the greatest performances in modern cinema. He did not live to accept the Oscar himself. His family accepted it for him. Heath Ledger does not need a mysterious case for his death to feel chilling. Just the fact that a 28-year-old man died right before the biggest role of his life made him immortal is enough for Hollywood to never tell this story in a normal voice again. Number 10. John Belushi. The man who made all of America laugh was found dead in a Hollywood bungalow at only 33. That was John Belushi, one of the first fires of Saturday Night Live. If you grew up with American television in those years, you understand Belushi did not just step onto the stage. He was Bluto in Animal House. He was Jake Blues in the Blues Brothers, standing beside Dan Aykroyd in a black suit, sunglasses, and the kind of energy only the 70s had. But then on March 5th, 1982, Belushi was found dead at Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles. That place was the kind of Hollywood address that likes to hide behind closed doors, private bungalows, famous friends, long nights, and stories nobody wants to tell the next morning. The official conclusion said he died from an accidental overdose. Kathy Smith later admitted her role in the drug dose that led to the tragedy and was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. But what makes this story heavy is not a line in a legal file. It is that very Hollywood feeling everyone could see a man burning too fast, but while that flame was still making audiences laugh, very few people truly pulled him out of the fire. And that is the bitter part. Fame, money, friends, status, all the things people think will protect a star sometimes become the black water pulling them deeper down. Belushi made all of America laugh, but Hollywood, as usual, only realized he had sunk too far when the final laugh had gone quiet. Number 9. James Dean Hollywood has many names that left too soon, but no name makes me sad, quite like James Dean. Not because the accident file is too unclear. On paper, the story is fairly clear. On September 30th, 1955, Dean was driving his Porsche 550 Spider to Salinas for a race. Near Cholame, California, his car collided with a Ford at the intersection of Route 46 and 41. Dean was only 24, but some endings refuse to stay inside a file. James Dean's ending is like that. When the accident happened, only East of Eden had been released. Rebel Without a Cause and Giant were still ahead of audiences. That means America had not even had time to fully see James Dean before it had to look at him as an unfinished legend. Then the details around the Porsche started turning the story into something almost mythic. The car had the nickname Little Bastard. According to Alec Guinness's memoir, he met Dean about a week before the accident and warned Dean not to get into that car. Later, rumors about the Little Bastard curse kept spreading from the car parts to the disappearance of the wreck. You do not have to believe the Porsche was cursed to understand why people are still haunted. As information, this was an accident. But in Hollywood memory, it feels like a prophecy that was too perfect, a rebellious young man, a silver sports car, a California road, and a career that had only just started burning bright. When Rebel Without a Cause came out afterward, Dean was no longer just an actor. He became the face of youth that was restless, angry, lonely, and painfully beautiful. Maybe the saddest thing is that James Dean never got the chance to grow old, make mistakes change, or live an ordinary life after fame. Hollywood kept him forever, at 24 in the red jacket with the face of someone who seemed to know he would not be staying long. Number 8. Sal Mineo. Do you still remember him? Mineo was Plato in Rebel Without a Cause, the lonely teenager standing beside James Dean and Natalie Wood in one of America's saddest youth movies. That role brought him an Oscar nomination when he was still very young, but Hollywood is often not kind to faces that were once teen idols. As Mineo grew up, the spotlight started moving away from him. On February 12, 1976, Sal Mineo came home after rehearsing the play P.S. Your Cat is Dead. Outside his apartment in West Hollywood, he was attacked. He was only 37. The case first led the press and the public to speculate a lot. Money was still in Mineo's jacket, so people were not sure it was just a simple robbery. Some rumors also dragged his private life and sexuality into the story. Later, Lionel Ray Williams was convicted of second-degree murder and several other robberies in the area. Legally, the case had an answer, but in Hollywood, memory Sal Mineo is still surrounded by a feeling of unease, maybe because he was the second piece in the dark shadow of Rebel Without a Cause. James Dean died after a car crash. Sal Mineo was murdered. Natalie Wood later drowned under controversial circumstances. The three faces that once represented America's rebellious youth all failed to find a peaceful ending. Sal Mineo is not a mystery because Hollywood does not know who was convicted. he haunts us because his story shows something colder. Sometimes the person who survives the legend is the one who has to carry the longest loneliness. Number 7. Rebecca Schaeffer. Rebecca Schaeffer was not the biggest star on this list, but her story is one of the reasons Hollywood never looked at fans with the same innocent eyes again. She was the young face of the sitcom My Sister Sam, only 21, trying to move from television into film. At the time of the tragedy, Rebecca was waiting for a script to audition for The Godfather Part 3. In other words, she was not at the end of the journey, she was only just beginning. On July 18, 1989, an obsessed stalker found his way to her apartment in Los Angeles. Rebecca opened the door because she thought it was someone delivering a script. She did not survive. I am saying it briefly not to make the story lighter, but because the scariest part here is not in the violent details. It is in how he found her. That man had stalked Rebecca for years, had tried to reach the set of My Sister Sam, then hired a private investigator to get her home address through DMV records. Back then, the personal information of a young actress could be pulled out of the system so easily that even hearing it now feels chilling. Robert John Bardo was later convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. But the Rebecca Schaeffer case did not end in the courtroom. It helped push forward some of the first anti-stalking laws in America and changed how personal information from the DMV was protected. That is her most painful legacy. After Rebecca, Hollywood could no longer say an obsessed person was just a fan who had gone a little too far. And after her, the front door of a young star's home was never a simple thing again. Number 6. Carl "Alfalfa" Switzer. Before we step into the final 5 names, we have to mention a face that once belonged to America's childhood alfalfa from The Little Rascals. And the final chapter of his life was nothing like a children's show. Carl Switzer was not a glamorous legend like Michael Jackson or Marilyn Monroe. He was something else, an old television memory. The standing hair, the freckled face, the off-key singing, that innocent look that made audiences laugh before he even had to do anything. After our gang, Switzer had a hard time escaping the shadow of alfalfa. The roles became fewer. He worked many other jobs, from training hunting dogs, guiding hunting trips to bartending. That sounds very far from the image of the boy who once made all of America laugh, but that was real life. On January 21, 1959, Switzer went to the home of Moses Bud Stilts in Mission Hills, Los Angeles. The story began with a dispute over reward money tied to a hunting dog that had been lost and then found. Something that seemed small, then it escalated into tragedy, a heated dispute, and tragically, both men had guns. Switzer did not survive, he was only 31. The file at the time leaned toward the account that Stilts had acted in self-defense. But many years later, Tom Corrigan, Stilts' stepson, told a different version, saying Switzer was leaving when the fatal moment happened. Corrigan was not called to testify at the coroner's inquest, and that gap is what kept the story from ever truly resting. Alfalfa once made audiences laugh with just one wrong note. But Carl Switzer's story reminds us that childhood on the screen does not protect anyone from darkness in real life. Take a deep breath, like the video, before we count down the final 5 names, which are even more disturbing. Number 5, Albert Decker. Albert Decker was a character actor, the kind of face you may have seen in Dr. Cyclops, The Killers, Kiss Me Deadly, The Wild Bunch, or classic TV series like Bonanza and Mission Impossible. He is a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but his private life almost seems to sit behind a thick curtain. On May 5, 1968, Albert Decker was found in his Hollywood home. And from the very beginning, this file had an uneasy feeling to it. Police first considered the possibility of suicide because the circumstances were so strange. The bathroom door was said to have been locked from the inside. There was no clear sign of forced entry. Some property was reported missing. Even that alone was enough to make the story feel unlike a normal ending. Later, the coroner found no convincing evidence of suicide or criminal action. The official conclusion leaned toward an accident caused by suffocation in a private and dangerous situation. This is the kind of detail I do not need and do not want to describe more clearly. Not because I am dodging it, but because some stories only need to be told just enough to feel chilling. What makes Albert Decker haunting is not that he is the most famous person on the list. It is the feeling of an old Hollywood actor, someone who walked across so many brightly lit sets, finally being remembered through a locked room and a file that leaves nobody truly at ease. If Hollywood has dark corners that studio lights never reach, Albert Decker's story is definitely in one of those corners. Number 4, Bob Crane. If Hogan's Heroes was the familiar laughter of 60s television, then Bob Crane's ending is what made that laughter go completely silent. Crane was Colonel Hogan, the sharp, confident face who always had a plan in a strange but beloved sitcom. A group of Allied prisoners secretly outsmarting German soldiers inside a camp during World War II. From 1965 to 1971, audiences invited him into their living rooms every week. He also received 2 Emmy nominations for that role. But on June 29, 1978, Bob Crane was found dead in the apartment where he was staying in Scottsdale, Arizona. At the time, he was performing in a dinner theater play called Beginner's Luck. The signs at the scene showed this was not an accident, not a health issue, and not a Hollywood story that could be closed gently. It became a real criminal case. The person who drew the most attention was John Henry Carpenter, a friend of Crane's and someone connected to video equipment. Many years later, Carpenter was brought to trial, but in 1994, the jury found there was not enough evidence to convict him. Carpenter denied involvement, and the Bob Crane case still remains there without a final answer solid enough. After the tragedy, Crane's private life was dug up by the press. The cheerful, clean image of Colonel Hogan on screen was no longer simple. But I do not think that makes him less pitiful. If anything, it only makes this story feel even more Hollywood, a face that made audiences laugh, a complicated private life, and a silent room no one can fully explain. Number 3, George Reeves. Before Superman was a movie blockbuster, George Reeves was the Superman of American living rooms in the black and white TV era. And because of that, his ending still gives people chills to this day. On June 16, 1959, George Reeves died at his home in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. He was only 45. The official conclusion was suicide, but that has never been an answer that made everyone feel settled. That night, his fiancée, Leonore Lemon, and several guests were in the house. Later accounts had details that made the public uneasy. Some physical details were also questioned from the examination taking place after the body had already been handled, to marks on his body that were not explained in a way everyone found satisfying. Reeves's mother did not believe the original conclusion and pushed for the case to be reviewed. George Reeves is not haunting because we know for sure there was a conspiracy behind it. No one has the right to say that when the legal file did not conclude that. He is haunting because after more than half a century, many people still cannot accept that the man who was the Superman of their childhood left in a room full of questions that were never answered. Number 2, Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood was the kind of star America watched grow up right before its eyes. From the little girl in Miracle on 34th Street to the rebellious girl in Rebel Without a Cause, then Maria in West Side Story. But her ending was on the dark water off Catalina. The night of November 28th into the early morning of November 29th, 1981, Natalie was on the yacht Splendor with her husband Robert Wagner, co-star Christopher Walken, and Captain Dennis DeVerne. The next morning, she was found in the ocean. Natalie Wood was only 43. At first, the case was treated as an accidental drowning. If the story had stopped there, maybe Hollywood would have closed it long ago. But this was Natalie Wood, and that night had too many gaps for the public to let go. In 2011, the case was reopened. A year later, her death certificate was changed from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. Just the phrase undetermined factors was enough to keep the name Natalie Wood from ever fully sinking out of Hollywood memory. Then there are the details that make people uneasy. No one completely agrees on how she ended up in the water. Captain Dennis DeVerne said many years later that he had not told police everything during the original investigation. Robert Wagner was once named a person of interest during the renewed investigation, but that does not mean he was convicted, and there was no legal conclusion charging him. And if you think this is already the biggest name Hollywood ever left in the dark, wait until the final name. Because it is not just a tragic ending, it is the biggest crack in the glittering face of all of Hollywood. Number 1, Marilyn Monroe. No name closes this list with more weight than Marilyn Monroe, because if Hollywood had one face to sell the American dream to the whole world, that very face left behind one of the saddest questions in film history. Marilyn was not just a sex symbol, she was gentlemen prefer blondes. Some like it, Hot the white dress flying over the subway grate, the happy birthday voice that made all of America hold its breath. Hollywood looked at Marilyn and saw the kind of light it wanted to sell to everyone: beautiful, seductive, fragile, impossible to look away from. But behind that image was a woman who was looked at too much and understood too little. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found at her home in Brentwood, Los Angeles. She was only 36. The official conclusion said the cause was acute barbiturate poisoning, and the case was recorded as probable suicide. That was the answer on paper. But with Marilyn, paper was never enough to make the public go quiet. Decades later, people still return to her final night. The timing of the police call, how the scene was handled, accounts that never fully put anyone at ease, powerful names pulled into the story, politics, the media doctors, rich men old. Hollywood, all of it keeps clinging around Marilyn as if all of America cannot accept that its biggest icon ended that alone. It has to be said clearly, no legal conclusion has replaced the official one. The review of the case in 1982 also did not find enough evidence to change the direction of the case. But what haunts us is not whether we can prove a conspiracy. What haunts us is that Marilyn Monroe was never left alone. When she was alive, she was turned into the image other people wanted to see. After she was gone, she kept getting pulled into the theories other people wanted to believe. Maybe that is the biggest tragedy. Marilyn did not just lose her life at 36. She lost the right to be remembered as a normal human being, a tired, lonely, talented, funny woman who longed to be loved and truly seen. Marilyn Monroe is not just Hollywood's most mysterious ending. She is proof that the brighter the light, the longer the shadow behind it. And after these 15 names, what stays with us is not only curiosity, it is the chilling feeling that Hollywood can turn human beings into legends, but it does not always know how to keep them alive as human beings. This list is sad. And honestly, it is kind of scary too, but I am not making this video to throw out more conspiracy theories or to turn old tragedies into cheap shock. In the end, what keeps names like Marilyn Monroe, Natalie Wood, Bruce Lee, or Judy Garland with us for so long is not only how they died, it is because they were once part of the memories of millions of people. And maybe that is the most haunting thing. What do these stories say about Hollywood, about fame, about the way a human being can be turned into such a huge symbol that even their private pain no longer belongs only to them? If you know any more details, memories, or perspectives about the names on this list, leave them in the comments. I always like reading real memories from people who also grew up with those legends. And if you like videos like this, subscribe to Weird Movie Secrets. We will be back with more Hollywood stories that not every channel dares to touch.